This is Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. In a few days, I am headed to a baby shower for one of my closest childhood friends. She's having a baby boy in just over a month. I've been to a lot of baby showers in the past decade. It's that time of my life. But while many friends of mine have chosen to get pregnant and have babies, I've watched many others take different paths. I have friends who adopted children, friends who definitely do not want to have kids. Some wanted to have children but struggled. Others ultimately found they could never have the type of family they'd once envisioned. If that describes you, today's Vermont Edition might be a bit difficult to listen to, or it might bring some comfort. We're going to share a recent episode of Brave Little State, our station's people-powered journalism podcast. In it, Vermont Public reporter Nina Keck looks into a listener's question about childlessness in Vermont. As you listen, if you have thoughts about what you're hearing or want to share your own reasons for not having children, you can send us an email to vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. We've already received a lot of really powerful personal stories from listeners, so thank you to everyone who's already written in. Now, after we listen to this Brave Little State episode together, we'll be joined by Amy Blackstone for a live discussion. She's a University of Maine professor of sociology and criminal justice and the author of the book Child-Free by Choice. We'll dive a bit deeper into why some people make the conscious choice to not have children. But first, let's listen together to Brave Little State.
If you really want to have children of your own, how do you come to terms with a life without them? This question cuts close to the bone for more people than you think. And frankly, it's not something people talk about publicly.
It is very private.
Yeah, definitely. It gets awkward.
It's not something people talk about even though it's so common. Part of that is because of how hard it is, right?
Really, really difficult.
It's been described as an existential crisis.
It stinks.
There's a biological kind of mechanism that goes off, and all of a sudden, you just really want that baby.
I think there's a lot that's at stake when somebody realizes that they can't get pregnant, they can't have children.
I think the hardest thing is you have to build a new picture of what your life is going to be.
So you'll never take your kids to school or teach them how to play hockey or, watch them grow up.
I always thought that my life would be being a mom and I would have kids and we would do family things.
If you ask many people who are parenting, what is the single most important part of your life? They say being a parent. And so then imagine not being able to do that. And it isn't hard to see how this could be really a earth-shattering experience emotionally.
I think we need to do better to understand all the reasons for childlessness. Some are by choice, some are by circumstance. Like that choice is such a loaded term.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thanks. Every episode of Brave Little State begins with a question from a listener. Today, that listener is Gina Accorsi.
So my name is Gina Accorsi, and I live in Milton. My question is, how common is childlessness in Vermont today? Is there a support system or community acceptance here for childless adults?
Because decisions about whether or not to have kids are so personal, I want to talk face-to-face. So I meet Gina at her house in Milton, which is tucked in a really pretty spot between farm fields and woods.
So how much land do you have?
Yeah, so we live on an acre. There's our neighbor, Will. So they're doing sap buckets right now.
Oh, wow.
Gina and her husband bought the farmhouse in 2019, and they love how rural it is.
I like gardening out here and taking the dogs on hikes. There's a lot of trails. Even you can see one right in the backyard, like up the hill.
Gina is 33. When she and her husband met 10 years ago, they were focused on school, then their careers. Having kids was never one of their goals. When they got married in 2020, they agreed they didn't want to have children. But As we all know, people can change their minds. Gina did, but her husband did not.
I would like to have a child, grow our family, be a mom, but it is not in the cards for me.
Partner disagreements are one of many causes for what's known as involuntary childlessness. We'll get more into terminology later, because it's loaded. But Gina says she's come to realize that giving up on a marriage to a man she loves deeply and starting over to have a child with someone else or by herself is not something she wants to do.
Yeah, it's scary a little to talk about it.
Having made that decision, now she's grieving the loss of a path she can't take and looking for support as she charts a new one.
I think sometimes with childlessness, it can be hard to find community. I think there's a lot of very private hardship that happens. And so it's hard to know who else maybe is out there like that, to know it's not just you. And then when you're seeking help, it can be hard to know where to look and how to ask with something that is so private feeling.
When Gina looked online, she found social media influencers, meditation guides for childlessness, and podcasts. Lots of podcasts.
And it's a very great pleasure today to speak to Jody Day about childlessness.
This is Happy Childless Mindset Podcast.
I will sprint up to my 42nd birthday, single and childless. Wow, how did that happen? I'm Helen Gallagher. This is Happy.
None of these resources resonated with Gina, at least not in any lasting way.
For me, it was kind of like if you go through a breakup and you eat ice cream. Because
it may make you feel better for a little while, but the ice cream doesn't help with your problem.
I didn't feel very uplifted by it, but I did feel a little bit okay, there are some other people somewhere out there.
Except actually finding those people out there, finding that in-person support, it proved difficult.
I didn't succeed at that.
She followed her therapist's suggestion to join a local grief support group. Gina found one, but it was for people who'd lost loved ones, and the group politely told her no.
Not like my grief wasn't enough or valid or something, but it wasn't the right kind of grief, I guess, for that. And so I'm all right, this isn't my community, but that's okay. But where do I fit into this? Where can I go? Yeah.
So, dear listeners, Gina turned to us to find support, answers, and advice on childlessness. Yeah, ironically, another podcast.
I believe in Brave Little State. I know you guys can do it. And I thank you because I feel a little braver for having asked and talked to you about it.
This episode about having kids or not having kids is really personal. But the first part of Gina's question is more data-driven. How common is childlessness in Vermont today? So let's jump in there.
I'll start by saying Gina is not alone, and actually she is a very common case in Vermont.
This is Kevin Chu, Executive Director of the Vermont Futures Project, a nonpartisan think tank researching the economic implications of the state's changing demographics. According to census data and the Vermont Department of Health, 72% of Vermonters don't have kids under the age of 18 at home. But that number includes empty nesters in addition to people who've never had children. Not the same thing. Vermont's Department of Health doesn't track the number of Vermonters who specifically have never had kids, but Kevin says it's trending up.
The proportion of people that do not have children at home has been growing in Vermont, and one indicator is the declining fertility rate. So that, over a longer period of time, as that falls, means fewer and fewer households have children.
Vermont leads the nation when it comes to not having babies. Really, we have the lowest fertility rate in the country. How low? According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Vermont has 44.3 births per 1,000 women of childbearing age. That's 20% fewer than South Dakota, which leads the fertility pack, along with Nebraska and Alaska. But it's not just Vermonters who are having fewer babies. University of New Hampshire demographer Ken Johnson says since 2007, the U.S. birth rate has dropped almost 17%.
Even though there are about 8% more women of childbearing age. So we're getting fewer births, significantly fewer births, even though there are more women in their childbearing years to have those babies.
There are a lot of explanations for this, like infertility, especially rising male infertility, something people rarely mention. According to recent data from Pew Research, Americans as a whole are rethinking whether they even want to become parents. A growing number are opting not to for a whole lot of reasons. The high cost of raising a child, a lack of affordable housing and daycare, climate change, career conflicts, no partner, and some just don't want to have kids. Unfortunately, we don't have state-level data, so I can't tell Gina exactly how many Vermonters have never had a child. But Kevin Chu and Ken Johnson say she may be part of a larger community in the state than she realizes.
I think that's quite likely that that's the case.
Yeah, she's not an outlier.
Gina may be comforted by the fact that she's not alone, but the country's shrinking birth rate is worrying conservative politicians.
We're effectively run in this country via the Democrats, via our corporate oligarchs, by a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices that they've made. And so
this is J.D. Vance, holding nothing back as he campaigned for Senate in 2021.
AOC, the entire future of the Democrats is controlled by people without children. And how does it make
Our question asker, Gina, says comments like those and others she's been hearing have worried her. Is she going to be judged if she doesn't have kids?
There's like a larger political rhetoric right now, right, about a woman's value and, if somebody is a mom, certain people expect women to be moms. And if we aren't moms, then what value do we bring to our communities?
Have a baby and get $5,000 for it? That is just one of the ideas that the Trump administration is reportedly tossing around to get birth rates up. The New York Times is reporting there are ideas on the table like a National Medal of Motherhood for women with 6 children or more.
I'll be known as the fertilization president. That's okay. That's not bad. That's not bad.
I've been hearing a lot lately about the political movement behind this push for motherhood and traditional gender roles. It's called pronatalism. The conservative politicians behind it want to jumpstart American fertility with government incentives, perks that childless individuals in low birth rate cities and states like Vermont may lose out on. I reached out to Professor Lori Essig. She directs gender, sexuality, and feminist studies at Middlebury College. She says that while more people are opting not to have kids, Gina may face more pushback being childless today than 10 or 15 years ago.
I think there's no doubt that the country and much of the world has taken this turn to being afraid of anything that might disrupt traditional gender hierarchies, whether that's abortion rights or not having children.
Okay, so fertility in the U.S. is down. Vermont's fertility rate is actually the lowest of the low, and the fear and stigma surrounding that drop is being politicized. I've also learned from reporting on this episode that people who don't have kids don't all fall into the same category, and semantics matter.
Child-free, childless.
A lot of people now are choosing to be child-free.
Is it, childless by choice? What does choice mean? Childless by circumstance?
That's Dr. Erica Bove of UVM Medical Center.
I'm a double board certified OBGYN and fertility specialist.
Before that, you heard the voice of Kate Weldon LeBlanc, Executive Director of All Paths Family Building, a Massachusetts-based nonprofit.
We provide emotional support, educational resources, and advocacy that are available for anyone that's struggling with fertility and family building.
Kate, Erica, and everyone I interviewed for this episode say it doesn't matter if someone is child-free and happy about it or childless and grieving when it comes to stigma. It's still there. And friends, family, even strangers feel like they can weigh in.
My very Catholic parents, what are they going to say?
Awkward conversations of being at a dinner party and someone saying like, oh, are you guys trying yet?
Well-meaning but insensitive people who just say the absolute worst things.
Someone said to me, not everyone is meant to be a parent. That was really, really hard.
Here's a pro tip. If you want to support a friend or family member who is childless and grieving, Kate Weldon LeBlanc says, skip the advice and definitely don't say, why don't you just adopt?
In my experience, if you just say, something to the effect of, this seems like it is or would be very challenging, and we love you, and we're so sorry you're going through something that is likely very challenging, and we are here for you in any way that we can help you.
As for Gina's hope of finding an in-person support group in Vermont, I failed, despite calling lots of people in different parts of the state. Like Chelsea Oclatus. She's the nurse manager at Maytree Healthcare for Women in South Burlington. And we ended up having a long conversation.
I think a support group would be a good idea, but I don't actually know of one that exists.
Chelsea told me she can empathize with Gina's situation of being at odds with her partner over whether to have kids.
Everything is so variable of where you are in your life, who you are with in your life, who you surround yourself with. But yeah, it is a really hard predicament.
She's just said many times that she doesn't really know what box she fits into, where she can find support.
Right. Can I ask all the other nurses in the room if any of them have any thoughts?
I'd be appreciative of that. Yeah, please do.
Okay, hold on one second. All right, unfortunately, no one's heard of anything, but everyone said, that's crazy that we haven't thought of that or that doesn't exist. And it is actually really making me think about, like, do we talk to patients more at annual exam appointments, or, are you happy with your family structure? Or, how does that conversation come up in a doctor's office that you're feeling like you want support in this area?
After the break, we'll find some support of our own.
Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lefrak. In just a moment, we're going to listen to the rest of this episode of Brave Little State about childlessness. And we're also going to hear how people in our region who can't have kids are supporting one another. And a reminder, if this conversation is striking a chord for you and you have your own thoughts or story to contribute, you can email us at vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. We'll be live at the end of the hour and we'll share some of those stories. This is Vermont Edition. Stay with us.
Thanks for listening to Vermont Edition, where support comes from Vital, Vermont information technology leaders. Did you know that 98.9% of Vermonters share health data with their providers through the nonprofit Vital to support better care? Learn more at vitl.net/sharing.
Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lefrak. If you're just joining us, we are listening together to a recent episode of the podcast Brave Little State. The winning question was from Gina Accorsi of Milton. She asks, how common is childlessness in Vermont today? Is there a support system or community acceptance here for childless adults? We left off with a discussion of the grief, stigma, and other feelings that people without kids can experience, whether or not childlessness was a choice. Next, reporter Nina Keck is going to go in search of some people who can offer support to folks like Gina and others in her shoes. Here's Nina.
Recording. Well, thank you for meeting me in person.
Oh, absolutely.
Short of an official support group, I at least wanted to find someone who could relate to what Gina is going through. Brave Little State posted a call out on Reddit, and I ended up connecting with Kat.
I'm Kat Maravich, and I live in White River Junction.
She's 42, and while her childless story is different from Gina's, I think she's exactly the kind of person that Gina's hoping to meet.
Ignore my microphone. I know it's sort of off-putting.
Kat and her husband got married in 2010, traveled all over, and worked a bunch of different jobs. She was 30 when they began trying to get pregnant, but nothing happened.
Normal. They never found out. They never found out what was going on.
So you never understood why?
No, and what I found out is that that's not uncommon.
In vitro fertilization wasn't something they wanted to pursue. So after 8 years of trying, they gave up on having children.
We've made our lives, we've been through the frustration and the hurt and all of that, and we're okay now.
How difficult was it for you to get to this point?
Really, really difficult.
Because I think that's what Gina wants to know. She's in the thick of it. She wants to know, how do you get to the other side? How do you get through it?
Yeah.
And do you ever get through it?
I think the hardest thing is you have to build a new picture of what your life is going to be.
I'm curious, Kat, when you and your husband are out at social gatherings now, cocktail party, work gathering, holiday this, neighborhood that, do people ask you, oh, do you have kids? And if so, how does that question affect you now?
It's fine now. I'll just say no lots of times depending on the situation, or I'll say, oh, we tried, but I just couldn't cook them, and laugh, and then change the subject, and it's fine. It's nice to kind of just get that out there and have it feel public and normal and be able to say that.
I bring up Gina's concern that other Vermonters might view her differently or judge her.
I think there's not so much judgment, but there is this kind of feeling that you're never quite a real adult. Like you're not quite grown up. It's the next stage of your adulthood. You turn 18, you go to school, you get married, you buy a house, you have kids, right? And then there's this whole stage of adulthood that you've never reached, and everyone kind of leaves you behind.
I asked Kat what advice she has for Gina and anyone listening who's childless and grieving. And she suggests finding something to tend and nurture, whether it's a pet or a garden.
Find a dream that you can grow into. I don't know, start a business or hike the Appalachian Trail or write a book or whatever it is. Find a project that will take you years and years to grow into, because that's what a family is.
Kat has oodles of great suggestions. Teach your neighbor how to bake. Share your bounty of strange trivia with a niece or nephew. Mentor at your local high school. Explain how you like to approach poetry with a writing group. Or share your hiking, bird watching, or camping skills with a scouting troop. And here's the thing that Kat wants to underline and put in all caps. Childless adults can play an amazing role in their community.
So when I was a teenager, my mom's best friend took me out for lunch one day, and she told me that if there was ever anything that I needed help with that I didn't want to tell my mom, I could tell her and she would help me, and she would not tell. And my mom knew she was doing this. And if I were ever drunk at a party, if I'd been arrested, if there was ever any reason I didn't feel comfortable going to my mom, I could go to her for anything, no questions asked, and she would not tell on me. And I always think about that, because there are some roles that parents cannot play. And it's so important to have someone else in the community who can be there for children in a way besides their parents.
In talking to Kat, I asked her how she navigated her grief early on. If the in-person support that Gina is looking for would have been helpful as she came to grips with childlessness.
It's not something that I sought out, and I'm not sure why, now that I think about it. Why didn't I ever look for that? There was definitely all of the communities around trying to get pregnant. Everyone's talking about their period and their hormones and their this and their that and everything. And then people either get pregnant or they just drop away and you never hear from them again. Because I feel like if you join a group like that, then that means that you're accepting it, and it takes so long to, by the time you accept it, it's almost like
admitting defeat, maybe.
Admitting defeat, and then you're almost past the point where you need the support. So it really is sort of a catch-22 in that way.
Not to put you on the spot,
yeah.
But if she were to reach out to you and say, would you have some time to talk to me? Would you be open to that? Or is it too personal?
Just meeting, getting together and talking, absolutely.
Bringing this all full circle, I called Gina to give her an update on the episode.
Hey, Nina. How's it going?
I tell her how I struck out in my attempts to find any in-person support groups, but then I tell her about Kat and that I think the two of them should meet.
That would be very wonderful to get that insight, because to have somebody tell me like it will be okay, like you will find your way, even if it's different than maybe the way you think you want right now, I would love that.
Well, great. Then I will pass on your information to her and her information to you, and we'll leave it in your court to do with that what you will.
Cool. That's really nice she was willing to do that, and that you were willing to facilitate the connection. Thank you.
Yeah.
I look forward to hearing the episode, all the work you've done. Thanks for taking up the question.
That was a great question. I'm really glad you asked it.
That episode of Brave Little State was reported by Nina Keck. Thanks to Gina Accorsi for the wonderful question. Coming up, we are going to hear your stories of why you are childless, either by chance or by choice. Our phone lines are now open, too. You can call in at 800-639-2211. We'll also be joined live by a University of Maine professor who researches why some people choose not to have children. That's coming up on Vermont Edition. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. If you're just joining us, we just listened to a recent episode of Brave Little State about childlessness. The birth rate in the United States is on the decline, and of all 50 states, Vermont's fertility rate is the lowest, according to the CDC. Brave Little State's question asker wanted children, but is not able to have them right now. Many people who don't have children, though, are childless by choice. Harriet wrote to us to say, I'm 69, and my husband and I often find that when surrounded by screaming children, we look at each other and say, I am so glad we didn't have kids. Now, as we're older, we're not sure who will take care of us, so we have decided not to get to the point where we would need such help. So, no regrets. Childlessness by choice is the subject of extensive research by our guest for the rest of the hour, Amy Blackstone. She's a professor of sociology and criminal justice at the University of Maine in Orono, and she's also the author of the book Child Free by Choice. Amy, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
We're so glad to have you. And listeners, we are glad to have you for this discussion as well. Perhaps you're someone who decided not to have kids or had fewer kids than you had originally wanted. Why'd you make that choice? Or perhaps you think it's our responsibility to have children to combat the declining birth rate. Call in and share your thoughts at 800-639-2211. So, Amy, as you discuss in your book, Child Free by Choice, there is a whole child-free movement that started decades ago. Could you tell us about its roots?
Yes, I can. So I will say that although the movement started decades ago, people have been opting out of parenthood for as long as people have been around. So the idea that parenthood is a choice and that some people might choose not to become parents is not new at all. We've had, for example, priests and nuns opting out of parenthood for years and years and years and years. We've had people we call spinsters and bachelors who haven't had kids. So we've always had people who choose not to have children, whatever we call them. But I would say that in around the time that birth control became more available and the second wave feminist movement began to really emerge in the 1960s and 70s, and women in our country at least began to get more and more opportunities in terms of education and working outside of the home, we saw more people making the choice not to have kids because more opportunities became available, in particular to women. And so that was the time that we saw women in particular raising awareness about this idea that parenthood is indeed a choice.
Mm. And there has been a lot of talk in the news recently about the declining birth rate in the United States, but also in other countries. Do we have data on why exactly this current decline is happening?
We do. I mean, let me note that the birth rate globally is certainly not declining. We're still gaining about 70 million people a year
Okay, that's
globally.
a lot.
So, yes, it is. Yes, it is. So we don't have a problem of too few people around the globe. So we're only talking within certain national borders when we talk about fertility decline. And we know from research that when women have access to education, when they have access to good medical care, when they have access to, as I said already, good jobs, and in areas where urbanization is high, fertility rates tend to be lower. So there are, some strong correlations between lower fertility rates and patterns that we can observe.
And birth rates are lower in New England than in many other parts of the United States. Are some of those reasons you just discussed the reason for that?
Yes, in the sense that certainly we have a pretty educated population and pretty decent workforce opportunities in New England. The other two biggies, I think, in our region of the country are that our populations tend to be higher. We have an aging population here in Maine, and I know that you have one of the oldest populations in Vermont as well.
We do. I think we might have you beat, Amy.
Oh, do you? Congratulations!
Not quite sure. We're neck and neck.
I know we're always fighting for the number one position there. And then another thing that I think gets overlooked in these conversations about fertility rates in New England that is key is that we have done a really good job of lowering our teen pregnancy rates, which in turn has lowered our fertility rates. And I think that is okay.
Yeah.
I think most people would agree that it's a good thing that our teen birth rates have gone down.
Well, if you have thoughts on why you have decided to not have children, maybe it was a conscious choice at a certain point in your life, give us a call at 800-639-2211. We got an email from Elizabeth in Hardwick who writes that in the mid-1970s, she and her husband decided not to have children for 3 reasons. Hers was that she had a seriously abusive childhood and couldn't imagine being completely responsible for another person's life. Her husband's was that as the second of 9 children who had had no dental care, inadequate health care, and a poor diet, he didn't think they would ever be able to afford to care for kids properly. And jointly, they believed that the world wasn't headed in a direction that they had a lot of faith in. Elizabeth writes, I watched the pride my siblings take in their now middle-aged children and mostly grown grandchildren, and I see a bit of what I've missed personally. But I also do not envy those children and grandchildren their future. I don't regret our decision. Amy, we heard a lot from our listeners about this existential concern about the future of our society and our planet that weighed heavily in people's decisions to not have children. Is that something you dive into in your book?
It is, yes. And again, I think we are hearing more and more of this sort of existential concern. It's not new. The zero population growth movement of the 1960s certainly is linked to the child-free movement in many ways. And there were people involved in the child-free movement who got involved because they were concerned about overconsumption in Western nations like the US and the carbon footprint of new babies born in Western nations like the US. And so there's always been an awareness, I think, among at least a contingent within the child-free movement of the impact of new babies on the environment in developed nations where we have a very high carbon footprint. So that's not new, but I would say that the awareness of that reality has certainly increased. You hear from Gen Z and millennials more and more about a concern, both about climate change and just generally about the state of the world. Those reasons, like I said, have always been cited by child-free people, but I think are increasingly cited by younger generations as reasons for being concerned about bringing new people into the world. And then that affordability one too is very common. The one that Elizabeth mentioned, her husband had concerns about. Another very common reason people mention today.
Yes, we got an email from a listener named Christina who writes, "Why would I ever wish to inflict my childhood on another? Public housing is incessant noise, smoking exposure, fights, cops, witnessing other people not watching or feeding their kids, etc. No thanks. I was nearly 40 before I could buy my own house and escape that hell. My only sibling, younger, is married but childless by choice. He was a battered child and feared becoming a batterer. He spent his adolescence and young adulthood in and out of jail, acting out from the battering history. Being childless to them meant staying out of jail." And that powerful story from Christina, and Christina, thank you so much for sharing that and being so open with us here today, makes me think of a whole other set of emails that we received ahead of today's show, Amy, about the lack or perceived lack of social supports, that social safety net in the United States for people and young families, contrasted to what it looks like in some other countries. But I do wonder, I mean, I do think there are, say, some Nordic countries that are well known for their social safety nets that also have very low birth rates. Yes?
They do. Although I will say that research shows that parents in those Scandinavian nations are happier than parents in the U.S. So while they are low in terms of their fertility rates, at least parents are happier there. So they've got something going for them.
If you have your own story to share about childlessness and feel comfortable sharing it, I know this is a very sensitive topic for many of us, please call in at 800-639-2211. We also got an email from somebody who asked to remain anonymous, who writes, As a teen, I questioned whether I'd be able to fit into the societal norm of having kids someday due to chronic migraines and even more chronic health problems which surfaced in my 20s. I've always needed to spend so much time and energy on myself just to keep my head above water, and stress and lack of sleep are huge triggers. It did not feel fair to bring a child into the world if I couldn't be there for them completely, and if it were possible that their very needs could debilitate me. 12 years ago, I began to date someone who also shared my desire to not have children for his own reasons, and we are still going strong. Without kids, we are not unfulfilled or work addicted. We are so happy to spend our free time with each other, our friends, our aging parents and grandparents, siblings, nieces, nephews, enjoying our hobbies, volunteering in our community, and, of course, spoiling our pets. Is this a topic that you talk about with students at the University of Maine, Amy? Does this come up in your classes often?
Of course it does, if for no other reason than it's one of the primary topics that I study. Yep. So yes, I always find a way to integrate this into any course I'm teaching, yes.
What are some of the things that you hear from students today about the decision to not have children? And I'm not sure, forgive me, I'm not sure how long you've been teaching, but has that changed over the years?
It has. So I have been teaching for 22 years, and I would say that in the earlier day, well, actually, if we count grad school, we can go all the way up to almost 30 years. So in the early days, I would say it was more common for me to encounter students who shared really my own coming of age experience, which was being surprised to learn that parenthood wasn't required, that it wasn't something that just automatically happened when you became a certain age or when you got your adult card or whatever. So early on, I think more people were new to the idea of a full adulthood without children and a joyful and fulfilling adulthood without children. Today, that idea is less surprising to students, but it's still, I'm finding that there are all kinds of myths that abound about the lives of people without children. So I still hear from students, well, aren't these people going to be lonely when they get older or have no one to care for them? Or are they selfish? Or are they doing this because they hate kids? So all of the kinds of stereotypes that we have about the, to quote our previous pope, the bitter, lonely, child-free people in the world, there's a strong hold there. Those stereotypes still exist.
Well, that echoes a sentiment from an email that we got from Linda in Halifax, Vermont, who found herself pushing up against other people's expectations of her. Linda writes that she got her tubes tied in her 20s because, quote, I knew I didn't want to have kids. I've never been maternal towards kids, except when feeling protective over a lost or threatened child. But I've always been maternal toward animals, and I've adopted all my dogs from rescues and shelters. Also, as an environmentalist, I feel strongly that there are too many people on the planet, and someone has to make a choice not to have kids. Finally, my mom, and someone like her has to make a choice not to have kids. Finally, she writes, my mom died at 62 from a rare disease. I wouldn't have known during my childbearing years whether I'd suffer the same fate. I wanted to prevent the continuance of that potentially genetic problem. It took years and several conversations with various doctors to find someone willing to tie my tubes in my 20s. I have never regretted it. I always knew, too, that if I did change my mind, as everyone except me thought that I would, I could adopt a child who needed a home. Let's go to the phones now. We have Xenia calling in from Barrytown. Xenia, go ahead.
Hi. My grandson just graduated high school, so that tells you about my age.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the people pushing the pro-natalist so-called movement are men, but I haven't heard any of those male individuals promote the idea that more women might be willing to have children if they were assured of equal partnership with their male partner, if the man were willing to do at least half of the housework and at least half of the child care and at least half of the grocery shopping and the laundry. I haven't heard that put forward. You know, the Elon Musks of the world that have 14 kids and counting with a variety of women, and these men are full of ideas about what women should do, but they aren't willing to pick up their half of the load.
Xenia, I'm hearing you're feeling an inherent sexism in the pro-natalist movement that seems to have been gaining traction here in the U.S. In recent months. Amy, you've been studying this very closely. Is that something that you sense as well?
Oh, absolutely. Amen, Xenia. What a radical idea that people could share the load of the work at home. And I will say that of the child-free adults that I interviewed for my book, this is one of the ideas that came up over and over again, particularly actually among the heterosexual couples that I interviewed. They said, we know that, from observing our parents and our friends after they have kids, even the most egalitarian couples, even the couples who think that they are all for equality, somehow wind up not sharing the load after a baby comes. Somehow, from our observations, the woman always ends up doing the lion's share of the work at home, even when both partners are working outside the home. And I think that, a corollary corollary movement alongside. Now, I'm not pushing pronatalism at all, but I think if those that had the idea of an equal partnership at home, they might gain more traction. Again, I'm not in the business of trying to get the pronatalists to win, but I do think that's a severe flaw in their model. That the idea that we want to revert to less equality for women, I don't think that's a winning marketing strategy.
And we only have a couple minutes left here, but I do want to say if you identify as a pronatalist or those ideas appeal to you, we would still love to hear why. You can email us your thoughts at vermontedition@vermontpublic.org, because judging by the interest that we've received in this topic, it's one that we'll return to again. Charlotte in Morrisville wrote to us to say, I just turned 30, and while I always assumed I would have kids, in the last few years, I've realized how impossible this country makes it. I'm not interested in going into tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt just to pay for healthcare and childcare, which are guaranteed for free in other countries around the world. I feel like I've been robbed of the opportunity to make a personal decision for myself and instead feel like it's an entirely political one. But I cannot bring a child into this world under these conditions. Amy, the way that Charlotte puts that, the struggle inherent in her decision was it was really clarifying to me that there are many people who are childless by choice and many others who might sort of appear to be childless by choice, but feel that decision has been really heavily impacted by the situation our world faces or the situation in our country. I really liked the way she put that.
I did too. I mean, as much as we think of this as a very personal choice, which it is also a social, structural, and political choice. I think all of us take factors beyond the individual into consideration as we're making these choices about our families, and Charlotte put that beautifully.
One more email to share here. It's from Steve in Grantham, New Hampshire, who writes, I'm almost 57 and I never wanted kids. I'm glad I don't have them. A dog is expensive enough. I've never been in a relationship, and America is a very kid-unfriendly place. We should encourage young people in the workforce from other nations to leave home and come here for better opportunities. So Steve brings up the ideas that we heard in that Brave Little State episode from Kevin Chu about the importance maybe of trying to grow our state's population, not just through trying to get more people to have kids, but through bringing people into the state, adults into the state for work opportunities.
Absolutely. This is a point I make in my book as well, and that I made at the very top. We're gaining 70 million people a year globally. We don't have a problem of too few people globally. So if we could think differently about maybe welcoming people within our borders rather than keeping them out, that might be a new way to think about increasing our fertility rates within our national borders, if that's a concern.
Amy Blackstone is a professor of both sociology and criminal justice at the University of Maine. She's the author of the book Child Free by Choice. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, that is all the time that we have for today's conversation. The Brave Little State that you heard earlier in the hour was reported by Nina Keck, with editing and production from Sabine Pooks, Burgess Brown, and Josh Crane. Their intern is Lucia McCallum, and Angela Evansy is their executive producer. Theme music by Ty Gibbons, other music by Blue Dot Sessions. Brave Little State is a production of Vermont Public and a member of the NPR network. Today's Vermont edition was directed by Aaliyah Papes. John Ahrens is our managing producer. Andrea Lorian and Daniela Fierro are our producers. Our intern and today's call screener is Callie Conexoral. Our theme music is by Myra Flynn. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch up again soon.